Hello. Um, my name is Raphael Fonseca, and I'm curator based in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I was invited by Teresa Gindrova to give this video talk to you all. So, first of all, I'd like to thank this opportunity, this invitation. I'd like to thank her, of course, and also the Chalupecký Society there in the Czech Republic, and of course all the things that the organization does, the award, and also this possibility of inviting international, I mean non-Czech curators to travel to Czech Republic to do some research and to also to do this kind of presentation. So anyway, I was supposed to travel this year, but since we are in the middle of this crazy pandemic COVID times, I was invited to try to organize a talk and record it on video like I'm doing right now. Certainly, it's a very anthropological experience. I mean, of course, I am also a professor here in Brazil. So, I mean, I during this pandemic times, I recorded some videos talking about artworks and also giving some kind of classes. But today is especially strange because I'm here alone in my apartment talking to the camera. So it really is kind of peculiar. But anyway, I hope you enjoy what I decided to present. And I hope also that my English doesn't fail too many times because, of course, English is not my first language. My first language is Portuguese. So it's totally normal that sometimes my pronunciation and my vocabulary fails a bit. And of course, I know also that it's a struggle to everyone watching this video in the Czech Republic because, of course, English is not also your first language. Well, with that said, at the moment, I'm working as one of the curators of the Contemporary Art Museum of Rio, the famous museum that Oscar Niemeyer projected that looked like, an UFO. I'm also working as a professor of visual arts in Federal High School here in Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil. I was born here in Rio. I live here already for 32 years, and I've been working as a curator in the last 10 years. And yeah, I started working at this museum 2017, and before that, and also, of course, during the time I'm working there, I've been also working as a freelance curator and doing some specific projects here and there, some of them Brazil, some of them out of Brazil. I was in doubt about what exactly I could present to you today. I even told Teresa that I thought about doing a presentation about the exhibitions we did at the museum in these 4 years, because anyway, due to political reasons, it seems that we're not going to keep on working there. Because I mean, unfortunately, that's normal in Brazil. When you change the government, the local government, the mayor of the city, literally the whole team that works in the fields of culture, they are. I mean, they change. They get substitutes, and a new team comes up. So we're waiting to know if we're going to continue working there or no. So I thought that perhaps since, I mean, I was told to try to make a presentation between 20 to 40, 30 minutes. I thought that instead of showing lots of photos of lots of different projects, it would be better if I focus in one project and try to talk more about it. And at the same time, try to also give an example of how my mind and my brain as a creator, how do I work and in what I am more or less interested, even knowing that I'm interested in lots of different things, and how somehow also this talk could be like an introduction to what I could be interested in seeing and visiting and learning in a future visit to the Czech Republic. So having said that, I think that it would be better if I just open my presentation here and I start showing some images from there. So just a second, I really hope it works because we all know how these things are, and I hope it's really recording. I'm going to keep on showing me over here, but in a few minutes I'm going to disappear. I'm going to focus only on the images. Yeah, it's all working. So I decided to share with you a bit of a project I did. I've been working since 2018 here in Brazil. This project is related to my PhD research. So, I mean, I have a whole education in art history. I did my bachelor in art history. I did my master's degree in art history, and I also did my PhD in art history. And I did my PhD between 2012 and 2016 in the State University of Rio de Janeiro. And I was part of the first class of the PhD there in the same institute where I did my bachelor degree. And I studied all my life. I mean, from the bachelor, bachelor more or less, but in the bachelor, but also in the, especially in the master degree, I studied Renaissance. So I studied to be a specialist in Renaissance art. And then since 2010, when I started giving classes in this federal high school here in Rio, it's named in English, it would be something like College Peter II, in Portuguese, Colégio Pedro II. It's one of the oldest federal public schools in Brazil. So when I started working there as a teacher of visual arts, but especially of contemporary art, I felt more and more involved in thinking and writing about contemporary art and reflecting about it. And then little by little, I decided that I should write more about it, and I just should start trying to do some, to try to create some shows. And then I felt more and more attached to the art scene here in Rio. And then I decided to do a PhD research, not about Renaissance and not about art from out of Brazil, because my master was about Portuguese art during the Renaissance. So I decided to do a project about art history in Brazil. And then after lots of research, I initially wrote a project about death in Brazil, and always in this trans-historical perspective. I mean, I think that that's one of my main interests as a creator, the possibility of thinking about projects that don't deal only with contemporary art, even knowing that, of course, contemporary art is a big, it's a big issue, it's a big field, but I'm very interested, possibly because of my education art history, to do projects where I can have like trans-historical dialogues. So I, anyway, started researching about death in Brazil, and then after that, I started researching about laziness in Brazil. And in the end, I felt on the hammock, and then I decided to do a PhD precisely about the iconography of the hammock and how it could be related to an idea of to a history of how different agents try to build and invent also certain ideas of national identity and Brazilianness through the iconography of the hammock, and sometimes also even through the object itself. So voila, that's why you're all at this moment seeing this GIF, this GIF, where I'm trying to make kind of, like DJing, like this mashup of different images from different contexts. Not all these images come from Brazil, but lots of these images also come from Europe and from other places in the world, but all of them somehow are trying to look at the country and the concept, and also, this abstract idea what Brazil, Brazilians, and Brazilianness could be. And they, these different ages, they created images about it. So here's a very trans-historical approach to the thesis itself. So I finished the PhD in 2016, and since that moment, I desired a lot to do this exhibition about my PhD research. And then I tried many places, I received some no's, and then a certain moment in 2018, there was an open call to this very big cultural center here in Brazil, probably the biggest federal public cultural center in the country, called Centro Cultural Banco do Brasil, in English, Bank of Brazil Cultural Center is the oldest public bank in Brazil also, I think. And then I apply a project with an art manager, a producer here from São Paulo. And then we received this grant to do the exhibition in 4 cities, in the 4 different units of the cultural center. So we opened the show in São Paulo. After that, we travel to Brasilia, from Brasilia to Rio, and that's where I am at the moment, and from Rio to Belo Horizonte. Unfortunately, we didn't have we couldn't, the show in this last city, Belo Horizonte, only opened for 5 days due to the pandemics. And then we had this hope that would open again. but it never opened again. And anyway, the exhibition already is installed, it's over, game over. And now we have the images and yeah, the whole experience in our minds and our bodies of how it was to work in the exhibition and to make it happen and to install it. So I thought to let me disappear here. Sorry, I'm shy. So I thought about sharing with you some aspects of the exhibition. So I brought these images. So I mean, just to explain a few points to start, the hammock is an object that was created by all the different people, the original people that lived in Brazil before the invasion of the Portuguese people in 1500. I mean, in this moment from in this year, that this division between the 15th century and the 16th century. So before this invasion of Brazil, there are no documents and no references, no inventories or any of that that quote the hammock being used anywhere in Europe, in Africa, or in Asia. So the hammock is, we could certainly say that is a Latin American technology, or better than that, is a technology that was created by the original population that lived and live until this moment, of course, in this long region from Uruguay to Mexico, but especially, of course, in the territories that have a more hot weather, a more tropical weather. So in the whole Caribbean area, especially in the islands that were part of the Spanish Empire in a certain moment of history, Mexico, Venezuela, Colombia, Bolivia also, Peru, and Brazil. I mean, just explaining like this because, of course, we have until nowadays the use of hammocks in Argentina, in Uruguay, uh, but the hammocks more used in these more tropical countries, these more tropical regions. So these photos I'm going to show you are photos of this last venue of the show that unfortunately was closed due to the COVID. So in the entrance of the show, you have, I mean, there's the title of it. I'm sorry, I didn't say the title until this moment. In Portuguese, it's named Vai Vem. In English, it's named To and Fro. So about this movement of the body on a hammock, doing like this. So after this big title on yellow over there, you have this group of paintings. This group of paintings were produced by a collective of artists here from the north of Brazil named Maku, Mahku. So it's the Honi Queen art movement. And they paint all these images dialoguing with different songs they've been chanting from, I mean, from generation to generation. So you have a figure over there of a leader of this group of Maku Iban Queen, that's his name, and he's been collecting these songs from his grandfather and from his father since he was very young, and now he has this big collection of different chants of different songs they've been singing, and in each of the venues we did the exhibition, we invited them to paint a different image related to a different song. So here you have all these representations, all of these depictions, sorry, there, all these paintings they're dealing with narratives where we have the hammock as a protagonist. And also, when we did the show in São Paulo, they did the painting directly on the wall. And after that, we really thought that would be better if we could do it, of course, on canvas, so they could sell it after that. Because of course, any return of this money to them is very important. Take care of their village there on the state of Acre in the north of Brazil. So here when you enter the exhibition space, since there was the last venue, the idea would have to, I mean, the idea would be to have all these paintings together, and you can hear on a speaker the sound of Iban, this leader, singing these songs, these different three songs. So here we have more or less like a retrospective of the exhibition. And that's the first section of the show, resistances and permanences. So the idea that even with the whole annihilation of different original population from Brazil, from what we call Brazil now, of course, from this, of course, the 16th century to nowadays, the hammock persisted. The hammock is here. The hammock is still symbolizing in a certain way the original cultures of this land. And the hammock, of course, can still bring to us some ancestral narratives, just like Maku is bringing this perspective to us. So after you enter, after you cross this like this entrance to the exhibition rooms, you will have the first room here with artists from different places, of course. You have here like Wellington Santana, an artist from Acre. You have here Jaido Isbel, an indigenous artist also from another state on the north. And also a very young artist here, Aline Baiana, that was recently in the last edition of the Berlin Biennial. So the idea all the time is to create these different dialogues between these works from different artists and different regions, and also artists from different generations. And the idea also is to try all the time to have this space between the works and have this empty space between all these artists, and to between this small silence in the show to create these bridges and create these dialogues. So here, for example, to think about the concept of resistance and permanence, you have a group of indigenous artists. So, I mean, from all the sections of the show, this is the one that has the biggest number of indigenous artists and biggest number of artists also dealing with topics of violence, with topics of decolonialism, with topics also of looking at recent complicated aspects of the life of the indigenous population in the country. So here, for example, on the left, you have these amazing paintings by Carmesia Emiliano, an indigenous artist, also a Makushi artist from a state in the north named Roraima. Anyway, I'm gonna share with you after the link to the catalog of the show. It's bilingual. There you can see all the images all in Portuguese and English. You can find all the information also by yourselves. And here on the right, we have another indigenous artist, Yermolai, that's also dealing with drawing, dealing with painting. So the show all the times try to bring together these different media, painting, and of course, and sculpture and objects. And anyway, you're gonna see more and more in the next slides. There's also something important to me in this show, that's the use of color. I mean, I try to not have all the walls painted, no, that's called white cube. I mean, that's called white. So all the walls, they have this color that remembers more something like a canvas. And you have in certain points this use of, colors like yellow, orange, pink. You're gonna see in the next images. Here, for example, you have the production of an important photographer here in Brazil, Claudia Andujar. She was born in Europe, and then she came to Brazil, escaping from the Nazi power. And then when she got here in Brazil, she came to São Paulo. She didn't speak Portuguese, and then she started to photograph. And using photography, she started to understand herself, being a new Brazilian here, let's say like that. And then she started a dialogue, especially with the Yanomami, a group of an indigenous people that live also in the north of Brazil, close to the Amazon. And she lived there for decades, and she took many pictures of them in all different types of situations and all different types of moments of daily life. So you have here dialogue with her. I mean, knowing that she's an activist, I thought it was interesting to have her dialoguing with indigenous artists. So I mean, so all this first section is dealing with this zigzag between different agents and between different types of activism. You have the second section of the show named The Hammock, the Sculpture. The sculpture is a hammock. The second section deals more with the fact that every hammock, of course, is a sculpture by itself. It's an object that has this 3D aspect that invites our body. So, of course, a hammock is a useful object, right? I mean, it's made to be used. It's made to be explored by our bodies in all different possible ways. And I thought that, of course, if the first section had artists that had this more political approach to art and this more explicit approach to indigenous culture, indigenous cultures in plural, why not having a second section that could deal with works that didn't have this very political and identitary, let's say like that, approach to art. You know, why not having a second section that where artists looked at the hammock as a formal element, as an element to explore weight, gravity, transparency, color, textures, and all of that. So here we have the second section. So you have, for example, two modernist chairs here in the middle, dialoguing with a new video, a commission by a very young artist here from Rio. On the right, have another sculpture by an older artist here from Rio also. There on this region here, you have this work by Ernesto Neto, this perhaps one of the most famous Brazilian artists out of Brazil. So one of the works he did in the beginning of his career. So again, we were very lucky because this building is a huge building. The rooms are super big also. So we were really able to know to seal all the relations between the works and let the body of the public explore and create their connections also. So here, for example, this work by Marconi Moreira, an artist also that lives in on a state close to the Amazon on the north, and also this work where he creates these metal hooks, and these hooks that of course makes us remember of the hooks that are necessary to hang a hammock, but also those hooks that at least here in Brazil are very used, where people are like hanging pieces of meat, like a butcher shop hook. So he's playing with this both images. I mean, he's playing with this imaginary between resting and being violent. So that's, I mean, that's the idea of this work, how he plays with this, you know, these phantoms of histories. Here's another room that's part of the same section. And again, I mean, how the hammock with this hole on it, on its middle, sorry, can makes us remember, I don't know, of the absence of the body and how it can make us remember of the fall of the body, and how this work in dialogue with a very young artist, Gustavo Caboclo, right here, that does lots of drawings about how the hammock relates the region where his mother was born, and his mother is indigenous, and how it can be related to the place where he is now. I mean, how he sees himself between being a white artist and an indigenous artist. So how he creates this fiction of himself using drawing. And here, yeah, again, another work by the same artist, Gustavo Caboclo, this animation he did for the show. And this other work by a very young artist also, Thales Lopes, here from Brazil. So as you see, it's a section that deals with, again, mostly with contemporary art and mostly with this more formal approach to the hammock. It's important to say that, of course, one very complicated issue to the show was the fact that we couldn't have hammocks in all the rooms that the public could enter into them because of, I mean, questions of safety, and if something bad happened with their bodies, I mean, if the public fell from a hammock, for example, it would be responsibility of the production team of the show and not of the cultural center. So here's a work. I mean, and here it's not installed in Belo Horizonte; it's installed in São Paulo. So here's a work that was, I mean, already created by this collective, this Brazilian collective named Opa Vivara here from Rio. They did this work in Europe many times, but they did this special version for the show. It's called the Social Network. So here they're playing, of course, with the idea of the, because in Portuguese, when we say the word in Portuguese for hammock is rede, and rede is a word that means many things at the same time. It means hammock, it means net, like fishing net, and also means network, like social network. So they're playing with it. So they create this huge collective hammock where the public is invited to enter and stay there together. And of course, as you can imagine, it's a very joyful work. It's a very sensual work also. And also it's crazy to see this image now in the end of 2020, because of course it automatically makes us remember of social distancing and all of that. So I thought it was interesting because this was like one of the great works in the section and one of the works that the public was more, of course, excited to interact and to be there and to take the selfies and all of that. So it was a work that became really important in the show. A third section of the exhibition is this one, named Looking at the Other, Looking at Yourself. So as you can imagine, there's a big history of different images showing the hammock related to Brazil from the 16th century to nowadays. So in the beginning of the project, I was very doubtful. I mean, should I exclude all the European artists and do a very radical decolonial exhibition? Or should I just have, European artists and cut the indigenous artists from the show? I mean, none of these two options made sense to me, especially the second one. So I decided to create this section where the public could see how European artists, photographers, painters, etc., created exotic images about Brazil using the hammock, and how nowadays, in the last 5 years, lots of artists, not only indigenous artists, but many indigenous artists, created images of themselves and their relations with the hammocks. And also how some of these artists even quoted these European artworks and decolonized, let's say like that, appropriated themselves of these artworks. So here have, of course, to start three very different approaches. I mean, on the right, an artist that lives in Germany at the moment, Francisco Klinger, and he comes from the north of Brazil, and he uses the hammock as some kind of cocoon, like if it was incubating something. On the left, I have Duigo, an indigenous artist from the Amazon, and she paints all the ritual of that the woman have of taking care of newborns. So it's a painting about the role of the woman on her culture. And in the middle, you have Maureen Biziliat, a photographer that came, if I'm not wrong, sorry, from the United States or from England. I think it was from England, sorry, to Brazil on the 50s, 60s. And then she started living in Brazil and, of course, lives here for decades. And she has a huge research about many aspects of Brazilian culture. One of them is is her gaze to different indigenous cultures. So I thought it was interesting to have, these different three approaches to the hammock. But I think that perhaps is more clear here. So here, for example, you have these vitrines where they're showing different engravings and different travel books from the 16th and 17th century. So all these German, French, Italian, Portuguese, even artists that came to Brazil and depicted Brazil in many different ways, and of course how all these images are ranging from documents to fiction. I mean, of course, most of them are based on uh, fictional narratives about Brazil or based on very precise books of people that came to Brazil, in theory at least, and how these image creators they started to create this, they started to build these fictions from these books and from this text anyway, and how little by little, these books about Brazil became a boom in Europe in the 17th, 18th century, and especially in the 19th century, and how one artist started to quote the other without even coming here in Brazil. Dialoguing with these vitrines, you have these two paintings by two different indigenous artists. So on the left, an image about maternity, and an image where the hammock is there almost like taking care of the small kid. And on the right, an image that deals more with a more ritualistic approach to the hammock, and how the hammock is also important to have this type of trance when you use different types of substances here in the Amazon, and like for example ayahuasca and other different types of roots they are prepare and drink in these shamanic rituals, and how the hammock's the space where you have the shamanic experience where more or less you have visions, transcendent visions, and very important visions. So again, it's all about creating these bridges between different moments of history. And also it's all about a work like this work by the Nilson Baniwa, an artist that was born on the north of Brazil and that lives now here in Rio, and this work titled Display. So he appropriated himself from an engraving by a duo of German scientists that came to Brazil on the 19th century, Spix and Martius, and then from there, he creates this collage. So he transforms an image where they're quoting like different objects they expropriated and brought to Europe. So he's quoting the original engraving and doing this collage and playing with it like if it was a vitrine of like, I don't know, a shopping mall store about indigenous art nowadays. So he's there again, you know, like playing with history and playing with iconographies and in a certain way decolonizing also this colonial iconography of how to show objects of a culture that wasn't European. In the first section of the show, you have this first section is titled Disseminations between Public and Private. So it's not more about, I mean, the third section deals a lot with how these European artists deal with the indigenous cultures in Brazil. So this fourth section is more about how the hammock already in the 19th century was perhaps one of the few furnitures in the houses here in Brazil and how it was disseminated in the whole country. I mean, lots of moments inside the houses, in other moments out of the houses. So that's why it's about public and private. For example, there's amazing photos here by Luis Braga, this, I mean, very famous Brazilian photographer. He's showing the hammock in public transportation, like for example, in some types of boats and ships in the Amazon, or the hammock in a more poor house here on the left, on this gorgeous yellow hammock there in the middle, like another house. So anyway, it's about how the hammocks being start appearing in very different levels of sociability here in Brazil, and how, of course, uh, another group of artists appropriated the hammock and create furniture, like the famous Lina Bobardi and this chair she created after doing a boat trip on the Amazon region, and how this furniture is well, anyway, they're quoting the hammock on this form. And again, a detail that I told you all before to pay attention to these colors on the wall. So here, of course, a more, you know, like a sunset color. And here, the projection is not good, but it's a pink wall. So anyway, I was trying to play for the first time a bit with colors and to try to don't have an exhibition that deals with this topic that deals so much with tropicality and with Brazilian identity in all the problematic ways that this concept can bring, but to at least have these colors dialoguing, you know, with a more handcrafted history of the hammock itself. So yeah, here you have another vitrine that's dealing with the narratives of Black slavery in Brazil. So during, of course, I don't know if you're aware, but Brazil is one of the countries where Black slavery was had one of the most cruel histories in the whole world. Was the country that was the last one to abolish slavery. And in this moment, in the 19th century, there are lots and lots of images that show this contrast between white people being carried on hammocks by black slaves. And on the other hand, you have all the iconographies of black people burying their families on hammocks also, because to bury someone using a hammock was the cheapest way of burial in this moment in history. So it's all about, in this sense, white privilege. It's all about racism, and it's all about how the hammock can tell these very different stories at the same time in the same place in the world, you know. So I think that this show plays a lot with it, how an object can hold over it and hold also, of course, through iconography, so many different and contrasting narratives. So here we have a vitrine with more historical works, and here on the walls we have a series of paintings by a very important painter here in Brazil, Dalton Paula, that has been researching and playing with the many iconographies that the Black slavery narrative, the Black slavery histories had and have until nowadays in Brazil. So yeah, I mean, the vitrine dedicated to this idea of white privilege. You can see much better in the catalog. So here, yeah, of course, Dalton Paula's work, The Hammock from 2008, and here, of course, the work by Urugendas, The Siesta from 1850, and yeah, of course, Regendas was this artist slash scientist that came to Brazil, did a lot of images, did a very important book also about his life here in Brazil and what he thought about the new empire that was created here. And here, of course, a painting that shows this privilege of people laying, of white woman laying on hammocks, and a black woman here on the left staying on the ground. So yeah, coming to an end, you have here this other section of the show, modernity, the spaces for laziness. So which was very interesting during the PhD research was to find out that the idea that people look at the hammock and say, well, the hammock is a lazy object or the hammock something made for lazy people is something that only came in the first waves of industrialization in Brazil. So until the 1850s, the hammock was the furniture in the country, and then suddenly with a more industrialized economy here, people started looking at the hammock and thinking that the hammock wasn't something modern, wasn't something up to date, wasn't something that brought to the table the idea of civilization that they thought it was important, you know, to Brazil to represent being this new big power in Latin America. So here you have, I mean, lots of different documents, a very important book, also Macunaíma, by a writer from São Paulo that really is one of the most important modern books. I mean, one of the great names and titles of Brazilian modern literature in this period, and it really created a whole series of I mean, created a whole wave of answers to the book on the newspapers, on reviews until nowadays, and of course, many artists quote the book and return to the book and try to answer it in different ways, especially because Macunaíma is a name of a mountain. It's a very important mountain in the north of Brazil, and is a place that, of course, is very sacred to the groups of religion of indigenous people that live there in the area and that was born there and raised there. So, in fact, this book that also deals with indigenous culture is an act of appropriation. I mean, how on the title and on the elements of the book, this writer from São Paulo is also appropriating himself from different indigenous cultures and creating something new from it. But there are lots of discussions now in Brazil in this whole debate about the colonialism of how we should take another look at this very important modernist book and think about what is the space that the author, Mário de Andrade, really gave to the indigenous populations in the narrative. So anyway, just making it short, it's a book that's being more and more rethought in Brazil finally, and there are many artists answering to it in very different ways. So yeah, here's a poster of the film that was filmed 50 years after the book was published, more or less. And yeah, and here we have another area of this section where we have, you know, indigenists works from the beginning of the 20th century. I mean, how the hammock was also important to create a modernist fictional gaze to indigenous cultures, again from white artists in this moment of history, and how, like for example, this painting by Manuel Santiago Tatu from 1929, a painting by an artist. I mean, he did this painting during a residency in France, and of course, it is an image that somehow creates, you know, this fictional Edinist idea of Amazonian culture, and how at the same time, I mean, if you had this example, for example, I mean, if you had this example of this Brazilian artist doing this painting, you have on the other hand this vitrine with these images of of some illustrated magazines, but they also use the hammocks. And you have also there a small vitrine over here with some copies of this publication of these comics of Joe Carioca, this character that Walt Disney created. And this character that sometimes try to represent the supposed laziness of people born in Rio. So again, it's all about the stereotype. It's all about the US people looking at Latin America and looking especially at Brazil and creating the stereotype of the people that doesn't like to work and of the people that try to win their money through very shady ways, and a character that preferred to rest than to work. And of course, the object he loves the most is the hammock. So it's interesting to see in the same period of time, more or less, an indigenous painter like Manuel Santiago, creating this fiction of indigenous cultures, and also Walt Disney side by side. So how modernism and this will of becoming, this anxiety of becoming modern as soon as possible created also these cliches that are still nowadays very present, not here, not only in Brazil, but anywhere, right? That the hammock is a symbol of laziness, that the hammock is a symbol of not working, is a symbol of il dolce fare niente, like the Italians would say, like the sweet uh, doing nothing, right? The sweet rest, let's say like that. And here in the last section of the show, I mean, I think this is the most complicated to comprehend if you didn't come to Brazil, if you're not very aware of Brazilian geography. Is a section about the northeast region of Brazil. So, I mean, when Brazil started to become a Portuguese colony, the first area that was colonized is the northeast region. The first capital was there, the city of Salvador in the state of Bahia. And then until nowadays, I mean, Brazil is pretty divided politically and culturally, and even our accents between North and South. For example, Rio is on the southeast of Brazil, but this whole region called the Northeast has a very strong identity that has to do, I mean, this would be a huge topic, has to do with lots of intellectuals, with different types of colonialism, comparing to the other areas of Brazil. But anyway, it was more or less invented an idea of regional identity over there. And since these regions, they are all close to the coast, I mean, they have a large area of coast. And since in these regions, you have the biggest industries of hammocks, this region is very associated with the hammock and therefore associated with laziness. So like, for example, if you are a northeastern person, you generally is seen in the southeast of Brazil as someone that is lazy, someone who doesn't like to work. I mean, lots of stereotypes and lots of prejudices also. So here's is a big section dedicated exclusively to the northeast region and how the hammock was important to build an identity of this area of Brazil. So here you have like some wood carvings. You have also this gorgeous, colorful hammock over there. And you have, anyway, lots of works that somehow are answering with how this region was more little by little attached to the hammock and attached to also this idea of laziness, how it was all invented by a different group of agents. So it's a section that dialogues a lot with the previous one because there's a lot with modernity, lots of works from the 50s, some of them also more recent from the 90s, 2000s, but they both have their roots on this first half of the 20th century. So after saying all that, I thought it was important to share some pieces of the design. So here you have like the poster of the exhibition, the vai-vem, the to and fro, and all the scholars. And here you have a short list, I mean, not a short list, but a long list of the artists in the show. We had a more or less almost like 150 artists, more or less, almost, if I'm not wrong, like 400 artworks. And of course, a list of names are like pointing to very, very different directions. Artists from all regions of Brazil, all generations, 16th century to contemporary art. So anyway, as I told you at the beginning, I think it's a good example of how I like to think about contemporary art. I mean, sorry, think about art and think about culture and think about history, you know, if you're aware of that famous Swiss writer, Abi Warburg, I think that might have more or less operates in that direction, even knowing that, of course, I'm deeply interested also in doing projects that deal only with commission works and only with contemporary art. But the idea of being able to do a trans-historical project like this is really something amazing. And here in the end, you have the catalog of the exhibition. I mean, I'm gonna share with you, of course, a link so you can download it all, and also a link to my website where you can see photos of the exhibition installed in all 4 cities. So here's a cover with this amazing painting by Carmesia Emiliano. And here you have the part of inside catalog. So I mean, all the design was taught to play with those colors again. And also these forms, they made us remember somehow, you know, of the curve of the hammock. So instead of having, you know, the curvy typography, the designers prefer to do this more, you know, this more these like straight lines to create the typography, you know, like if they transform the curve of the hammock in a V, if you geometrize if you create a geometry with the forms of the hammock, you would get to this typography, you know, where the V is the A, and of course you just spin the V and becomes an E and all of that. So here you have inside the catalog, I mean, again, displaying with the triangles and the forms and the colors, and also it's bilingual. And we have here all the works that are part of the show with all the labels. And we decided to invite a group of authors to contribute to the catalog. So instead of having my thesis published in here, the idea is more to have all these different gazes looking at the show. So we invited, if I'm not wrong, 15 authors to write the catalog from different areas, regions, and fields of study. So they, you know, analyze different works in the exhibition, and they bring their contributions to the table also. So yeah, with that said, I I mean, I'd like to thank your attention and following up all this, you know, this waterfall of informations. I hope at least the presentation made you a bit curious about all the possible narratives of art history in Brazil. And I also hope to travel as soon as possible to the Czech Republic to do some research and to think also about, I don't know, some things that really interest me, as you suppose, like this transhistorical approach to image, also about how contemporary art can deal with national histories, at the same time, how contemporary art can deal with topics like pleasure, leisure, works that somehow are activated by the body of the public, um, works that somehow deal with humor and see life in a more informal way, in a more fun way, in a more even funny way. So I think that I'm a creator. I'm more and more interested on pleasure and joy as political tools, not explicit ones, but you know, I think you understood it. Instead of dealing precisely with the trauma. So I mean, I'm all the time, you know, dancing between these both topics, but I think that I'm more and more into working, collaborating, and learning from artists that are supposed to transform the trauma in something more joyful, or dealing with humor to bring the traumas and our, I don't know, colonial narratives and our anti-fascist perspectives to the mainstream, to the general public. Anyway, I don't want to make it longer. I think I talked too much, but I hope you liked it. And I'm gonna ask the people from the organization of the institution to paste here with the video on YouTube my website and also the link to the catalog to To and Fro to Via Veins exhibition. So yeah, I hope you're okay. I hope you have more or less okay also end of the year, and I hope to meet and I hope to meet some of you that are watching this video next year as soon as possible. So thank you and bye bye.